Are comic books a good investment? I've often said they're not.
These are the questions we ask ourselves
Yeah,
every day.
and really, there's a lot of things in the current comic market. Some things have gone down 70, 80, 90% from their highs a couple of years ago. And it really has people wondering, are comics a good investment? We're going to give you some information, some real information that you can kind of sink your teeth into to give you a better idea. Now, disclaimer, I'm not telling you to buy any of the books we're talking about. I'm not trying to sell you anything. That's not what we're doing. I'm just giving you information like I found it, and some of it was quite surprising. But first, every Monday night at 5 p.m., we sell comics on Instagram. It's a cherry pick. I go through maybe thousands of books sometimes, only bring a couple hundred. Instagram is really the heart of our comic book selling business, which is what we do.
I'll show some of the books that we've been selling on there right here on the screen. Check it out.
Yeah, this kind of stuff. Anyway, make sure to check that out. Also, we buy collections. Know that if you're trying to sell your comic book collection, watch some of our videos, get an idea of who we are. We're really excited to talk to people, and we are great to deal with. Really, we're the best. Sell to us.
Info's in our description if you want to reach out to us about collections. We also sell on Whatnot every Thursday and Friday at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And we are selling items over on Encore, which is a new selling platform, doing auctions and buy it nows over there as well. All linked in the description below.
So for a long time, I obviously say that comic books aren't a good investment per se. I want to talk today about some evidence or some lack of evidence. Let's figure that out. So I'll start with this. If you were to invest in the S&P Standard & Poor's 500, which is a mutual fund of 500 companies, and you did that over a 10-year period of time, it's about 13% a year. And that's not even compounded. Compounded, it comes up to about 23% a year. That's really considered middle-of-the-road investment. It's not aggressive. It's not too relaxed. So it's a really good investment. A lot of 401ks are tied up in that. So you got to figure just a middle-of-the-road investment should make at least 23% compounded over a 10-year period. If you started with $100 10 years ago, put it in a fund like that, you would have $230 today. Is comic books at least that good? Because if they're not, you kind of have to wonder if you shouldn't be investing somewhere else. So how do you look at comic books for that type of investment? And what I'll do is we're going to do some 10-year snapshots on books. Here's what's interesting about 10-year snapshots. We're not talking about high watermarks. A book might have been, I'll make numbers up, $100 10 years ago, but 4 years ago, some really big news came out. It went to $1,000, and now it's $150. You might be thinking, I lost $900 or whatever it is, that it's now down from its high watermark. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about 10 years ago, it was X. 2025 this year, it is this. And did it go up? So if that $100 book 10 years ago is now $150, that's 50% over 10 years or 5% a year. Is that as good as the S&P 500? It is not. It is not. So would you have been better just putting money in S&P 500? Well, you wouldn't have been as entertained as comic books can do for you. And comic books are a lot more than investing. So some of the books we're going to talk about are also passion comics that people still love. Are they good investments? More criteria. What I did is I aimed right at the center. Like, what is the most traded book? In what grade have the most people had the opportunity to buy this particular book? Because some of these are big keys, hard to find. So it might be a low to mid grade. And then Rachel went back and looked at, like, let's look at the highest grade copies over the same period and see what kind of growth they had. So you can start to put some ideas on, is investment grade very high grade? Is it a better investment than, let's say, a mid-grade or an entry-level copy?
And as we go through these, before we even say if it was a good investment or not, throw your guesses in the comments if you think it was a good investment or not.
Yeah, so here's the way you play along. As we mentioned a book, I want you to think in your mind, has this gone up 23% a year over a 10-year period? Or even 13%? Because we can play with that 13% number and pretend like there's not a compounding. Think about it. Did this book make the cut? We're going to start with something really simple. Scooby-Doo, number 1. Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? 1970. That book's pretty popular. I wouldn't say it's like that is one of the top 100 keys, but a lot of people would like to own that book. Still a lot of things being made with Scooby-Doo. It's still in popular culture.
Yeah, Scooby-Doo.
There'll be new movies in the future about Scooby-Doo. It's just something that's part of pop culture. All right, so there's 532 total graded copies. Of that, 4.0 is the most common with 53 copies. So 53 out of those are 4.0. So let's look at 4.0 performance over a 10-year period. And this isn't exact because it only goes back 2018, but just figure these are numbers in that 10-year period.
It's close to 10 years.
Yeah,
it's not
it's
7
close
or 8.
enough.
Whatever.
This is going to work for what we're doing. I'm telling
Bear
you.
with us.
So it sold in this period, its lowest at the beginning was $240. Right now, it's around $600 in that grade. So that is approximately a 15% 15% flat. So it doesn't make the 23% mark, but it does meet the 13% mark. So how did the high grade side do?
It was really interesting. Let me tell you some data points. The highest graded copy sold of Scooby-Doo #1 is a 9.2. There are 10 total 9.2s on the census, which is not very many compared to 532 copies. The earliest copy sold for $5,322, and then just recently in 2022, it sold for $12,600 with a 19% increase year over year.
So it did a little bit better. Didn't do 23%.
No.
If you were investing in that book, you would have done better in the S&P 500, but you wouldn't have had Scooby-Doo, and I know there's a value to that. Let's move on to the next book.
Well, in either way, they're both expensive. Whether you bought it in 2018 or 2022.
Do I think that was a good investment? I do if you got a lot of enjoyment out of it. Anything that you buy and you really like having it, and at some point you can sell it for more, that's fantastic. And this book fits into that category, that it's worth more than it was. It probably had a high watermark along the way that was higher and went back down, and here's where we are. But as a 10-year investment, it's moderate to low, but not bad. I mean, I've seen worse. So we're going to go right to a big book, Hulk 181. Hulk 181, by the way, has exploded and gone down, and people might have lost a lot of money buying it short term, selling it. But let's talk about a 10-year period. Hulk 181 is the first full appearance of Wolverine. Came out in 1974. There are how many total copies?
There's 18,798 total graded copies, which that doesn't surprise me, but...
That doesn't surprise me. That is a lot of graded copies, though. The most common grade in this, what did I say it was, 7.5?
Yeah.
7.5. 7.5 is the most common grade. So let's talk about what that's done in the last 10 years. 10 years ago, a 7.5 was $1,300. If you were to buy a 7.5 today, $3,457. That is a 16.5% increase, which doesn't go to the 23%, but I mean, that's an admirable increase, right?
Especially for a 7.5, that's an attainable, obviously there's 1,200 of them out there, an attainable grade, and obviously expensive, but still a nice increase.
And I would like to note, a lot of people have spent a lot more than what the average price is if they were buying them in 2020, 21, or 22 in that era. You might have spent a lot more than that. But we're talking about 10 years. What happens over a 10-year period? So on this book, it's pretty good. I mean, it doesn't hit the 23, but it does hit 13. What do you have for the high grade side?
Yeah, let's talk about the high grade stuff. So the highest graded copy is a 9.8. There's 166 total 9.8s on the census. Which
is incredibly small for how many total books
Yeah, compared to 18,000. That's not very many.
Very small.
The earliest that it sold for was 13,000 in that 10-year period, and then it just recently sold for 72,000.
Okay, so what percentage is that per year?
50%.
Every year, you've made 50% if you bought then and you still hold that book if you were to sell it for the going rate. That is a good investment.
Whoever bought that one in 2015 for 13,000, I bet they feel good if they still have it.
So in this particular instance, the investment grade, the highest grade, someone who invested a lot of money, they've done pretty well on paper if they were able to sell that book for what it went for last time, which is another little twist there, right? Another thing about these types of books, and I want to notice, I'm only talking about blue labels. I'm not talking about signature series. I'm not talking about restored comics. Also, in this period of time, a lot less of these super high-grade copies have ever been available. That's why I started with what's most available. When Rachel's mentioning, hey, the highest grade had this percentage, they may not be available. And then one more point, every dollar does not equal another dollar. If I make 15% on something that costs $10, then I have made $1.50. If I made 15% on something that costs $10,000, then I made $1,500. So there's a huge difference in the amounts of money. Now, you might be able to go out and buy 20 of one of these cheaper books if you could find them. And that's a whole different thing about investing, right? It's like knowing what the future holds Or is that a good investment?
Which no one knows.
We don't know. But that's what we're talking about.
But this is a good overview, at least.
Yeah, let's get to our next book. So this is Action 252. It's the first appearance of Supergirl, among other things. This is a popular book with DC fans. So, this is a book that still sells. It usually sells around GPA, which is, kind of the average what CGC books are selling for. There's only 1,369 of these graded. So this is a book that was well loved. By the way, at this time, Superman titles were the highest selling titles in the world.
Yeah.
They sold more Superman comics than anything else, so keep that in mind. So a 3.0 is the most graded. That has the most graded copies. What do I have it at, Rachel?
There are 155 3.0s on the census.
So if you would have bought one of these 10 years ago, it would have cost you around $1,250. This book has been popular. If you bought one this year, it probably cost you $1,250. For zero. You have made not $1 in this grade. So,
in 3.0.
So, yeah, money's worth about 30% less than it was then. So that same book, you really spent $1,600 on it. So it's actually going down. I mean, and you have to consider that when you're buying things, that 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, the value of money continues to go down. So that's another aspect of investing that you have to know about. Just wanted to throw that out there.
Because even though it looks the same, it's not
it's
necessarily
less.
the same.
It's literally gone down. So what about the high grade side of this?
So the highest graded copy of this book is a 9.4. There's only 4 total graded 9.4s on the census.
Wow, that's low.
It's also only traded 3 times. So I used the aggregate between the most recent and the latest, or the oldest. So
Gotcha.
the oldest sale was from 2011.
Okay.
For $45,000, $45,410.
What grade?
In 9.4.
Wow, okay.
It is the first Supergirl, and it's a 9.4, and there's only 4. And back then, who knows how many there actually only were? There could have been only 1.
Right.
And then just recently, in 2024, it sold for $50,400.
So what percentage is that?
1.1% increase.
Yeah, not good. So it doesn't pass that litmus test. I hope that whoever got this really has a passion for the book, or maybe sees sometime in the future that the book might grow at a higher rate than it has. It came out in 1959. It's an early Silver Age book. I don't know, man. I mean, it's had 65 years, 66 years to figure it out.
Well, Superman might just be plateaued.
Maybe the next
point.
50 years, that book will exceed 1%. But right now, if you'd have invested in the S&P 500, you would have made a lot more money than this. This is more of a passion book. Next book. Our next book's Our Army at War 83. It's the first appearance of Sergeant Rock. So you might be saying, that book's not on my radar. Well, I'll tell you, this book does sell. Every time it comes up, it sells. It's the only gray tone. Nope, there's another gray tone book on here. It's one of 2 gray tone books on the list we have in front of us. 1959. This book is cool. I'd like to own a copy. Let's talk about the census. How many copies are in the census? 241. That's one of the reasons it's so popular. It's just hard to get. So the people that do want it fight over every copy. And then what's the most common graded on this?
2.5. There's 32.
This book is notorious for there's no high grade copies in existence. In this series, if you get over 8.0, you have found the Chupacabra. They don't exist. Just so you know what you're dealing with. You're dealing with comic books that people read them to death. Anyway, enough about the book. Let's talk about the money. In 2015, you could have had a copy for $1,200. In 2025, $1,625. So
2.5.
That's 3.5% a year. It's probably just keeping up with actually the increase in dollar. Mm-hmm. So it's flat. I mean, essentially flat. Not a good investment in that grade. Hopefully a book you love. It's definitely a book I want to own. I like it. Let's talk about the high grade side.
This is very interesting. So 7.0 is the only graded, only high grade copy that's traded multiple times.
In CGC that we know of. Now, just keep in mind, guys, there's other sales, there's auctions, there's private parties, and we're not privy to that. Actually, no one is unless you were there or you know about it. So that's fine, very fine, just to remind you.
Yeah, 7.0. There's 10 7.0s on the census. In 2015, a 7.0 sold for $7,400. And in 2025, a 7.0 sold for $13,200 with a 7.8% increase.
Also not a good investment based on the S&P 500. That it doesn't really matter which ones you bought in. I mean, it's a couple of percentage points different. If you'd have spent a lot more money getting a higher grade copy, I don't know if it would have paid off in the long run to just have a copy of a book that doesn't seem in the last 10 years to be growing. Let's go to another book. Here's a great book. Marvel Spotlight number 5, 1972, the first appearance of the Ghost Rider, the modern Ghost Rider. There was a Western Ghost Rider, but this book has been popular for a long time. And I've had a very, very high-grade copy. As a matter of fact, I had a 9/8 white pages, which several years back sold for $250,000. It might have been the copy I had. I didn't own it. I sold it a long time ago. And I made a profit. And the person who sold it to me made a profit. But the next person probably did better if they held it. So what we're going to do is we're going to find the most traded copy. There's 6,616 of these graded. That is a lot, okay? This, by the way, is a very popular book. Out of that, 7.0 is the most common, 565 7.0s. So 7.0 is an admirable grade, fine, very fine. Let's look at numbers. In 2015, a 7.0 sold for $249. Let's call it $250. Now, at the time, that's, 10 years ago, it's still kind of expensive for a mid-grade copy because there were some high grades floating out. In 2025, that same book sold for $1,400, not the same book, but the same grade, sold for almost $1,500. What percentage increase? 50% per year. 50% per year. Wrap your mind around that. If you'd have bought that 10 years ago, forget that it's gone down. It's gone down since 2022. It's played around like this. 50% a year. So that's huge. You'd have made 500%, way better than the S&P 500. Fantastic investment. Let's look at the high grade side. This is a mid-grade copy.
So the highest graded copy is a 9.8. There's 6 9.8s. I think that's increased since
It
the
has.
last time we looked at it.
Well, they've added another one.
So there's
that's
6
interesting. I didn't know
9.8s. In 2016, a 9.8 sold for $48,000. 48.5. In 2024... a 9.8 sold for $360,000.
For what percentage?
80% a year.
That's...
I mean, you can see by the numbers, $48,000 to $360,000.
It's like Apple stock.
That's
I mean,
insane.
that's insane. If you'd have bought a copy 10 years ago, paid the most anyone had ever paid at the time.
And it's surprising, too, because it hasn't... There's another one that's added to the census. Usually when more of a high-grade copy get added, you see the price go down.
I don't know if all 6 have sold. So that's one thing. You're right, but I think a lot of people are just going to hold these. That is a monumental investment if someone did it. Way better in the high grade side than in the mid grade, but I want to go back to 50%. You could have bought a lot more copies of that.
Right. Or you could just have gotten a lot more back for your investment
without
having to put as much in.
You didn't have the same barrier of entry of having to come up with all that money on something that's speculative. So this book's a slam dunk, incredible investment.
And you've had one. Wow.
I had a night, yeah. Let's go to the next book. Something else no one's ever heard of, Giant Size X-Men number 1. I typically stay away from big keys. Not for this conversation. We're going to talk about them because this book exploded and then went down in the last few years. But let's talk about 10 years. Giant Size X-Men number 1, 1975. First appearance of the new X-Men team. Starting off a whole new era. Kind of blowing Marvel up. Very popular book. Square bound. Hard to find in grade because it's all twisted and angled like square bound books can be. Very, very popular. How many graded copies of this exist?
14,296.
It's massive. 7.5 is the most common grade, which makes sense for a square bound book. They're a little harder to press, a little harder to get out the...
There's 1,200 of them, though. That's a lot.
1,200 copies in that grade. Let's look at a 10-year period and see how they've done. In 2015, it was around $1,250 to get a copy. In 2025, it's about $3,650. So this is at 19%. 19% growth, very good. I didn't even put into consideration the high watermarks that happened, and a bunch of people might have lost a lot of money if they'd have bought this comparatively. But the fact is, if you bought it 10 years ago, you're still holding on that book. Theoretically, you're at about a 19% increase, which is pretty good. Pretty good.
Yeah.
What about the high grade side?
So, there's a 9.9 that it's graded, but it's only traded once, so I'm doing 9.8.
Yeah,
Can you believe there's a 9.9 of that?
Yeah.
That's crazy. Anyway, so CGC 9.8.
Just before you even say it, understand that we're trying to be as accurate as we can.
Well, yeah, it's only traded once, and it's probably only been around for a couple years, because 9.9's kind of new.
It is. So we're trying to chip out the outliers. Anyway,
yeah,
continue.
so we're getting an aggregate. So there are 268 9.8s, which is a lot.
It's a lot.
Considering how many are graded.
Considering a lot of things.
So in the 10-year period, in 2015, one sold for $5,200.
Okay.
And then in 2025, just recently, one sold for $30,000 with a 47% increase.
And that's gone down from its high water mark of around $75,000.
Yeah.
So what was the percentage increase per year?
47%.
Wow.
Year over year.
So it's not higher.
If we did this in like a 3-year period, it would be much different.
But we're doing it from an investment perspective, and you really need some runway for that. So that's either way. If you'd have bought either copy, once again, kind of making that statement that sometimes investment grade doesn't matter. It depends on what the book is.
And if you hold on to it for a really long time.
Yeah, and 10 years in the world of comics, I've had some comic books. I have magazines from when I was 15. You know, I have stuff from when I was a kid. So you could theoretically have had this for much longer. And I would say that your delta, the growth, is even higher for way before that. Mm-hmm. There's another winner. Definitely beats S&P.
Which it makes sense. It's a big key. Like,
if you invested in that book for a 10-year period, you've done very well if you can sell it for the going rate. Next book. House of Secrets, number 92, 1971. Gray tone cover. Bernie Wrightson. First appearance of Swamp Thing. A book I own. Slap a picture of mine up there. I got a copy. I mean, why not? I don't think I have a lot of copies of what we're talking about today, but I got one of those temporarily because I sell comics. Anyway, this book is definitely a contender. Let's see if it was a good investment. So how many total graded copies of this book?
3,772. Not as many as I would expect, considering how popular it is. But
I still think there's a lot of raw copies out there.
Yeah.
And then what do we find the aggregate grade, the average grade, the highest one?
7.0 with 342 graded.
Yeah, so you have more chances of getting a 7.0 than any other grade. Let's look at some numbers. If you wanted to get a copy of this in 2015, you probably spent around $400, $425. If you wanted to get a 7.0 in 2025, you spent around $2,000. That is a percentage, 37% a year. Massive. What a great 10-year investment. It exceeds S&P 500. It's just a solid investment in 7.0. But how do we do in the high grade side?
Well, the highest graded copy is a 9.8. There's only 3. Can you believe there's only 3? I mean, out of 3,700, there's only 3 9.8s.
So there's half as many of these as there is Marvel Spotlight 5.
Which makes sense to me.
Let's talk about, does it rival the numbers of Marvel Spotlight 5?
So in a 10-year period, the earliest it sold for was $11,500.
Okay.
It just recently sold in 2024 for $84,000 with a 63% increase year over year.
Every year, 63%. Here's, and I'm just going to say this book I think is undervalued. I mean, the first appearance of Ghost Rider or the first appearance of Swamp Thing with Bernie Wrightson cover, something to think about. Anyway,
Marvel Spotlight's still a better investment, though. It's 80% for the highest graded copy.
Unbelievable. If I could get a
if
I could turn back time. So this book is an amazing investment. If you had this over the last 10 years, congratulations.
And people know, too, because they want it.
People
want that book.
You picked a good horse. It wasn't cheap then. That was an expensive book back then.
Yeah, like $11,000 in 2014. That's a crap ton of money.
So far, what do you think? I mean, I really do think it depends on what books you're selecting, but comic book investing can be very lucrative. It can actually, if you pick the right books. Or it can just
stay stagnant and not move at all and not go under, just stay the same.
It depends on what you're buying and why you're buying it.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. Next book. Okay, I kind of did a different style of book. I'm doing one that's kind of popular right now, but it's always been popular, and it's Spider-Man number 50, the first appearance of Kingpin from 1967. Iconic, popular book. There's obviously some other Spider-Mans you're thinking, man, you should have done those. I did one other Spider-Man title, but I wanted to hit this one because it has been very popular and is still, every time one goes up for sale, they never have a problem selling. Let's talk about the numbers. So how many total graded copies?
8,186 total graded copies.
That's massive. So what is the average grade? Which grade is there the most of?
4.5 with 701 copies.
Okay, so there's more chances of you finding a 4.5 than any other grade of this book. And that's why we use these types of grades to measure them. Let's look at numbers. In 2015, you could have had one for $190. Right? 4.5, $109. That wasn't cheap for a low-grade comic. Today, $650. So what's the average there? 24% a year? It's right there with S&P 500. If you'd have owned that book for 10 years, congratulations. You made an investment in a book that is perhaps as good as the S&P 500. What about the high-grade side?
So the highest graded copy is a 9.8. There's 8 9.8s out of 8,000, which is, hard to do.
Find one of those. Wow.
So the earliest in the 10-year period that it sold for was $30,000 in 9.8. $30,000. And it just recently, in the last couple of years, sold for $99,000.
Ooh-wee, that's 33% a year?
29% increase.
29%. So the percentage...
Still in that sweet spot.
It is. It is. It is an incredible investment on a high buy-in item.
What that tells me is that's a solid book to invest in. Just from that information. Like, no matter what grade you buy, probably a good investment.
So I guess what you're saying is, like, if you saw one today, in any grade, should you buy it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we're not telling you to do that.
No.
Just based on this data alone, it seems like no matter what grade you get, it's going to go up in price over 10 years.
Comics aren't necessarily crashing. I think that some of these books, from a 10-year perspective, were incredible investments. Forget their high watermarks. That's the thing. You have to wash that out of your mind.
It's hard, though, if you bought one of those.
If you paid that amount of money, you might have some runway in front of you to get your money back. But you did bet on the right horse. You just bet the wrong amount. You know what I'm saying? Next book. This is one Rachel recommended I look up, and I'm like...
there's so many of them out there.
I'm like, well, it's not an incredibly valuable book. And then I looked at the data. I'm like, yeah, this is poignant. So, Marvel Superhero Secret Wars number 8. It is the origin of the suit itself, that it's not something of this earth. Rachel, give me some stats.
Well, there's 33,248 total graded copies on the census.
Oh...
Which is why I wanted to talk about this book, because there's so many of them. And 9/6s, there's 6,807 of them.
If you ever hear someone like hold that book up and say it's rare, you have to laugh. 6,600 9/6s. But let's talk about the numbers. In 2015, it would have cost you about $85 to get a 9/6. 2025 cost you about $290 to get a 9/6 CGC slab. That's 23% a year. It kind of hits that sweet point. It's as good as investing in the S&P 500.
And it's
which is
easier
great
to get because there's a lot of them.
If you think about it, if you bought a book like that and it's performed as well as the S&P 500, that is a good investment. But what about the high grade side?
There are 5 10-0s, but I'm not going to do the 10-0s. We're going to do 9/8.
It's too complicated.
Even though I like the 10-0s, it's fine. There are 6,316 9/8s on the census.
Yeah.
Just a little less than
And we're not
9/6s.
considering newsstand, non-newsstand, and it can make
just direct.
Can make a 20% difference.
Yeah,
just so you know.
we're not, and there's less of them. So in 2015, a 9/8 was $144, and in 2025, one just recently sold for $454, with a 21.5% increase year after year.
So if you bought this book, you're making 21% a year. It's still a little bit under the S&P 500. But
9/6 is a better investment.
I would say 9/6 would actually have been a better investment.
And there's more of them out there, so.
So this is, we're getting in the weeds a little bit on that, but it's interesting because this is a super common book, and you still could have made money on this book if you'd have bought it 10 years ago. Next book. Showcase number 4, 1956, first appearance of Barry Allen, known by most as the first Silver Age book. And let's talk about this book a little bit. This book's been popular since I can remember. How many graded copies are there?
624 graded copies.
That's not many, but it is a 1956 book. 4.5 is the most common grade.
51 4.5s on the census.
There's 51 of them. So let's look at these numbers real quick. 2015, you could have had one for $12,500. Not cheap. That's a lot of money back then. But if you went to buy one today, it cost you $23,000. Which is a difference of 8.4%. Not a great investment in that grade in terms of comparing it to the S&P 500. Still increasing, but just slightly over inflation.
And it's a 4.5. It might not be people's grade. So let's look at the highest grade.
Not that you have a lot of options, just so you know. Yeah.
The highest graded copy is a 9/6. There is only one of them.
9/6 of that book.
But it is traded many times, surprisingly.
Has it?
From 2010 to 2025. That's what this aggregate is happening from.
Because this book is really expensive, and there hasn't been a lot of tracked auctions.
And there's only one of them.
It probably has sold, but we don't have those numbers, but spit numbers.
So in 2009, it sold for $179,250. In 2009.
Yeah.
In 2024, this same book, because there's only one, sold for $900,000.
So what are the percentages on that?
26% increase year over year for 15 years.
Over 15 years.
That is really good.
It's kind of like buying platinum or something. I mean, you have to spend so much money to get there, but look at the percentage you're making on that amount of money. What an incredible investment if you were able to get in on that book. Incredible. Who would have known? I don't know, but I'm sitting here telling you.
I mean, anyone I think would know that book in 9/6 is worth a lot of money.
Incredible investment. Yeah. Next book.
Oh, this next one we picked because of me.
Talk about it.
This is Marvel Superheroes 20 from 1969. Doctor Doom. There's a bunch of other appearances too, but I just got it. It's Doctor Doom.
It's an iconic, popular Doctor Doom cover. Some people would say that's the best Doctor Doom cover.
That's why I bought one myself.
I always say some people say that it's the most non-commitment thing you could ever say. Who says, Dave? I don't know. Some people.
Someone out there in the world.
Somebody said it.
There are 1,512 total graded copies of this book on the census. The most common grade is a 6.5 with 187 copies.
And that's somewhere around your copy.
Mine's like a 5.5, but
you think yours is a 5.5?
Mine's also raw, so this doesn't count. Okay. In that 10-year period, in the earlier of the 10 years, it sold for $79 in 6.5.
Okay.
It just recently sold for $340 in 6.5 with a 47% increase year over year.
That's sick.
That's pretty good.
Now you're into like double what the S&P 500
makes me feel good
with compounding. So that would have been a fantastic investment based on if you could get what they've gone for recently. What about the high grade?
So the highest graded copy is a 9.8. There are 5 of them. 5 9.8s on the census.
I'd like to see one of those.
I know. So this is in an 11-year period, but anyway. In 2014, it sold for $1,100 in 9.8, which that's a lot of money for 2015.
Yeah.
Or 2014. Just recently, in the last year, it sold for $11,400 with a 93% increase year over year.
There you go. That was an incredible investment book.
so even if you got a low rag copy, you're probably good. Just hold on to that for a while.
And just pause here. I really do think that if you consider yourself a comic investor, you have to consider the fact that holding on to these books is the key.
Yeah. I mean, I bought my book because I wanted it. I didn't plan on selling it. But it makes me feel good knowing I could make money on it later if I want to.
That you bought something that appreciates.
Yeah.
It has a history of appreciation.
Even though I have no desire to sell it.
See, I was saying at the beginning of this, you could show this to your significant other if the information goes your way.
See?
Look, honey, we make so much money on comic books, so my budget's going up. Some of these, not so much. So, some of these, it doesn't work like this for every book.
We have one more book left.
All right, let's talk about the last book. I just threw this in there. At the very end, I'm like, just out of curiosity, let's do the same type of survey on Amazing Fantasy 15. First appearance of Spectacular Spider-Man, first appearance of Peter Parker, all that. Incredibly popular book, probably the most popular Marvel book ever made. Let's talk about it. How many total copies of that exist?
4,003.
There's 4,003 graded copies, and there's raw copies out there too. Out of the 4,003, what's the most common grade?
3.0 with 293 copies graded.
All right, so you had more of a chance of finding a 3.0 than any other grade. Let's talk numbers. So in 2015, if you bought a 3.0, about 10K. It's about 10K.
Whew.
In 2025, if you bought a 3.0, it's about $22,000. So 12% a year is actually under. It didn't make the 13, certainly didn't make the 23%. In this particular grade, it wouldn't have been a great investment. It wouldn't have been a complete loss. But remember, you have to factor inflation and other things in there.
Well, there's only 293 3.0s. So and with 4,000 copies, there's probably a lot higher, overall more above a 3.0 than.
Well, tell us the investment. Let's tell us the investment grade option. If you were to get this in investment grade,
I was cracking up at writing these numbers down, man. Highest graded copy is a 9.6 with 4 total graded. Could you imagine? Just even looking at one of those.
Well, these books are notorious for Marvel chipping and some other things due to the paper, and they would cut the cover wrong so it would have little chips. Getting a 9.6 is unheard of.
And there's only 4 of them out of 4,000. So
unheard of.
So, again, this is in a 10-year period from 2011 to 2021 because of how many times it trades.
There's not a lot of rated, but let's just talk about the average investment.
Yes. So in 2011, one sold for $1.1 million. I had to make sure I put the commas in there, right? Because I was like, there are a lot of zeros in here. In 2021, it sold for $3.6 million with a 22% increase.
Year over year.
Year over year.
Yeah, so...
Still not in the S&P.
Isn't that fascinating? If you had put your money in S&P 500, you would have made more money, but you wouldn't have had the first appearance of Spider-Man.
That's true. And there's only 4 of them. And, I just know when that book sells again, it's going to be for more. I can't say that. I don't know. But, I assume.
If a 9.8 came up, holy
even though
mackerel.
that 3.6 million was in, the comic boom I still think that it would sell for more today.
Yeah, it's hard to say.
Because that book is kind of an outlier out of like...
It would be an auction and someone would be taking a big chunk of it.
Let me know what you think, 'cause maybe I'm wrong. I probably am. Anyway.
Yeah, so...
I don't know.
So what do you think? Are comics worth investing in?
Some are.
I would say some you can do very well in without an incredible amount of effort if you just aim for the center of the dial and get keys. The more rare that book is, doesn't necessarily, in terms of grade, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to make a lot more in value if the key is the right key. So, interesting information. Do with it what you will. We're glad to have shared that with you. This was fun putting this together.
I think the biggest thing I'm taking away from this is like, I mean, a lot of people, especially people that buy from us, like we really focus on grade. We really like to sell high grade comics.
Yeah.
And obviously, like there are books out there that you can't get in high grade because of price.
Correct.
And so there are a lot of good investments you can make with mid to low grade books.
Yep. And the consideration that people are cleaning and pressing, so a lot of copies have been cracked out of their slabs and their grades are increasing. So you might have bought a copy 10 years ago that wasn't pressed, and all of a sudden you press it, it's actually a higher grade. There's a lot of nuance to this. It's certainly, this isn't scientific. It's kind of general, but I think the general idea is enough. There's a lot of copies that get sold we don't know about. There's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes. We only focused really on Silver Age to early Bronze. We might do this again on Golden Age.
Well, that Marvel Superheroes was an outlier because I threw that one in last
Yeah,
minute.
but it's a good example.
I wanted to do
It's
that.
a good example. It doesn't have to be a major key to be a good investment. So you can tell somebody that, like, hey, man, comics suck. I don't know. It depends on if you have a Marvel Superheroes 20 and when you bought it. Or some of these other books, or thousands of others, and there's probably thousands of losers. So it can be a very good hobby, I think, from an investment perspective, which is good because there's a lot of utility in comics. They bring joy, they bring entertainment. They certainly help your ego along the way if you have the best, the most, the rarest. I mean, the ego utility is high in comics, and we all need that to live, because without ego, we're not much.
Well, and if you buy something that you love and you didn't spend a lot of money on it, and then you find out later that it's worth more money, that feels good. Even if you didn't mean to do that.
Yeah.
Even if you didn't mean to invest in
It was
something
an
like
accident. Rachel's not investing, but here she's got like a book. Maybe one day it'd be worth $3,000.
that. I doubt it. Not in a 5.5, maybe.
All right, let us know in the comments if you like this kind of content, if you'd like us to do this on another era or in another specific like subsection of comics, because we enjoyed the exercise. See you guys next time.
Please subscribe to the channel and follow us on all of our social media platforms.
Yeah, if you like this type of content, it really helps if you like and subscribe and share and do all that stuff, because it makes the videos more available to people, and then we can make videos more often. Anyway, see you next time.
Goodbye.